Last month, I told an enthusiastic triathlete something he really didn't want to hear. He was desperate to copy the pros and start doing lactate testing. But I knew it would be a massive mistake. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why, and whether you might be making the same error. If you're new here, then hey, I'm James, a registered sport and exercise nutritionist. I work with amateur and pro triathletes to help them train and race better, recover faster, and do all of this in a healthy, sustainable way. Today, we're diving into something that's generating a lot of buzz in the triathlon world: lactate testing. You've probably seen the photos and videos. Pros like Kristian Blummenfelt, Gustav, Iden, and Rudy von Berg sweating their asses off and testing little drops of blood like there's no tomorrow. It looks impressive, scientific, and professional. And that's exactly what drew a triathlete who emailed me into it. He'd read articles as well as my lactate training guide, watched videos, and was convinced this was the missing piece in his training. But when he asked me whether he should be doing it and what the best way to start was, I gave him some feedback which didn't quite go in the direction he had hoped. And this brings us on to a crucial question. Is lactate testing really the secret weapon it appears to be, or are we being distracted by the shiny object syndrome? Before we dive into whether you should be doing it, let's understand what lactate testing actually is and why it matters. Lactate is produced in your muscles during exercise, and contrary to popular belief, it's not just a waste product. It's actually a valuable fuel source. When you exercise, your body produces more lactate as intensity increases, and measuring these levels can give us incredible insight into how your body is responding to training. Think of lactate as your body's way of sending status updates about your exercise intensity. Just like your phone sends notifications about its battery level, lactate tells us exactly how hard your body is working and which energy systems you're using. The testing process involves taking small blood samples during exercise, usually from an ear or finger, and measuring the lactate concentration. This helps establish your training zones with incredible precision, much more accurate than heart rate or perceived effort alone. So let's talk about why amateurs and pros are so excited about this approach. Precision in training zones. Instead of guessing or relying solely on heart rate, lactate testing gives you much more personalized training zones. This means, in theory, every session hits exactly where it should. No more guessing whether you're really at threshold or not. Injury prevention. By knowing exactly how hard you're working, you can avoid overreaching too frequently. This means more consistent training and less time spent recovering from illness or injury. Performance tracking. Regular testing shows you exactly how you're progressing. Being able to compare your numbers a couple of months apart gives you objective data to use to determine how well you're responding to training. So back to the triathlete that I mentioned earlier. He emailed me, excited after watching my other videos on lactate testing and downloading my lactate guide, which, quick plug by the way, you can download for free in the comments and description section of this video. But he loved the idea of getting into the data, buying the equipment and setting up his lactate protocol. But here's the interesting part. I asked him a couple of questions about his current training regime and his diet, and this is what I discovered. He would frequently train in the morning without having any food beforehand. He was regularly skipping meals due to his busy schedule, and his carbohydrate intake before training sessions didn't sound optimal. His protein intake was probably well below what I'd recommend for a triathlete. This is where the reality check comes in. While lactate testing is a powerful tool, it's like putting a roof on the house that hasn't actually been built properly yet. Sure, it kind of is fit for purpose, but there is a heck of a lot of benefit to be gained by focusing on some other aspects first. So let's be honest about the challenges with lactate testing that many people seem to just skip over. Rather than just focusing on the excitement of testing, it's so important to consider it as a whole. I know, I'm so boring sometimes. Quality testing equipment isn't cheap, and regular testing adds up quickly. Just getting set up is likely to cost you around $500, and you're looking at $1 or $2 every test strip you use. And I can promise you, especially at the start and when you're working harder, you're going to mess up some readings and have to redo it. Each testing session requires careful setup and a proper protocol. It's not quite as simple as the Instagram photos and videos make it look. Proper interpretation of results requires experience and knowledge. It's easy to misinterpret the data, which could mean that you don't actually get the most out of it. Some triathletes become overly fixated on the numbers, losing touch with their body's natural feedback and feeling like they can't train without it. So when does lactate testing make sense? In my opinion, the answer lies in understanding where you are in your triathlon journey. Triathletes who are ready for lactate testing have already built a solid foundation. They're consistently hitting their training sessions, maintaining proper nutrition, and recovering well. They're performing at a relatively high level and have both the time and budget to commit to regular testing. And perhaps most importantly, they work with a coach who truly understands how to interpret and apply the data. Or they do that themselves and they really spend the time learning and interpreting how to do it properly. But for many triathletes, the timing just isn't right yet. If you're struggling with training consistency, still working on nutrition basics, or are new to structured training, lactate testing might be premature. You're likely to get much more benefit from doing those basics right than focusing on something like lactate testing. And this brings us back to the triathlete that I mentioned. My advice to him was to focus on the things that at that moment in time would be, in my opinion, more beneficial to him. So making sure he ate enough carbs before high intensity training, stopped the majority of his morning fasted workouts, and ate enough protein to give him the nutrients to speed up his recovery. And to be clear, this doesn't mean he wouldn't have benefited from using lactate testing. It would have helped him to get his training zones better personalized to his current fitness, and it would have stopped him from working harder than he needed to. There's no denying it. But what I always see with triathletes is that it's easy to become overwhelmed with too many things. So generally I find it's important to focus on one thing at a time until that's habit, and then move on to the next. In this case, it seemed like it would be more beneficial to focus on his diet before lactate testing, and reconsider it once he'd optimized it. Lactate testing can be a wonderful tool, but it's not a magic bullet. If you're interested in improving your training and your performance, start with the fundamentals and work up from there. Learning what to eat before training and how to recover properly are key areas to get right, and you can watch my videos on these to help get you on track.